bikini-clad Kasumi and a big pair of You're about to embark on games that have everyone from Senator Joe Lieberman to your grandmother up in arms. They're the most controversial games of all time. I hope you have the balls to hang because the hits the fan right now on Filter. I'm Diane Mizoda, and welcome to Filter, a hand-picked top 10 video game countdown as voted on by you, the viewer, at G4TV.com. Now, when I was a kid, I thought Pitfall Harry was hot and E.T. was rebellious. Well, a lot has changed since then. Today, gamers would rather pee on hookers than chase pellets and swing from vines. And thanks to that yearning, we have before you the most controversial games ever made. But before we get to your top 10 reasons to be a menace to society and gawk at scantily clad women, we cornered some of you to give us your take on what makes a game controversial. Let's see what you said.
A game's controversial when people talk about it, I think. I mean, whether it's violence, whether it's sex, a controversial game is one that people are interested in talking about it.
It's hard to say. I mean, it depends who's doing the judging. I mean, what I may think is controversial is certainly different from what other people might think is controversial. The games that get the most controversy are the ones with violence or sex. But there's not many of those games, so there's only a few that are really getting all the attention.
The thing that appeals to many gamers about controversial games is being able to do things in the game that you couldn't get away with in real life. And a game like Grand Theft Auto that involves sleeping with a prostitute, you get all the fun of the experience without having to worry about seeing the doctor for antibiotics afterwards.
The appeal of the games is, something you can't do in real life. Might as well do it. Blowing apart your neighbor, running over the old lady on the street. It's controversial, but hey, it's fun.
Do controversial games have an influence on society? I think to some degree, sure. I think much like a movie you watch or a TV show or a book you read, I think what you see in those games influence your views of the world to some degree. But I think it's all within the context.
Much like other forms of art and entertainment, those games that may be considered controversial are aimed at an adult audience, and that's the appeal of these games.
You play these games and you experience them as escapism, and you realize that they're sort of alternate realities. So I think in the right context, they can be seen as sort of games that in some ways let you get aggression out inside of the game world instead of in the real world. I think they do have some impact, absolutely, but I don't think it's necessarily a correlation where, a violent game makes people more violent or a sexual game makes people think more sexually or anything like that. I think, they're entertainment experiences and should be treated as that.
Now it's time to get to the boobage. Let's face it, there are certain games you don't want your mom to know you're playing. Like a game that puts raunchy, bare-breasted women on BMX bikes and has you fantasizing about what it would be like to touch their hooters. BMX XXX is at 10.
BMX XXX was controversial because it included these sort of in-between scenes of these scores strippers that would basically strip for you inside of the game.
Here, riding a bike. Oh, hey, there's some strippers.
Most people were attracted to the controversial aspect of it.
There were female topless bike riders and stuff like that inside the game. So they really just tried to shock you.
Toplessness, dogs humping, urination.
Swearing for no reason, and pimps and hookers and dog crap. And why?
Controversy is great if it's on top of a great game, but if it's just controversy for the sake of controversy, gamers see through that and they didn't buy the game.
We go from the depths of a woman's anatomy to the depths of mortality. Carmageddon has everyone up in a hoo-ha because it rewards you for running down pedestrians. I say if you can't handle the heat, then get your fat out of the kitchen. Carmageddon blows up at number 9.
Carmageddon is a cool game, but it's blatantly controversial. It's just basically a driving game where you run people over for points. It's a funny game, you know, it's got a morbid aspect, of course, to it, but it's so gimmicky, it's so fun.
Gruesome, and it was kind of old technology. What they were trying to do is going to come out more with the new technology. It was very ambitious.
Armageddon was awesome. You could basically beat the game just by running over hundreds upon hundreds of people, blood splattering all over your car.
Carmageddon, one of my personal favorites, and that's again the graphic nature of the subject matter. I mean, being able to get extra points for stylistically splattering a pedestrian is pretty big.
Carmageddon allowed you to run over people, kind of like that great old movie Death Race 2000, and any game that allows you to do that, it's +5 in my book.
Sure, Carmageddon has the ethics of a dog-killing mailman, but don't forget about our favorite four-letter pile of carnage, Doom. The game gained just as much notoriety for its graphics and gameplay as it did for its violence and gore. id Software's classic shooter upsets PTA moms everywhere, but who really gives a what they think? It's at 8.
Doom was really one of the first gameplay experiences where it kind of put you, face first person into the action. It really was a revolutionary game.
Doom was, I think, controversial because it was just such a great game, and it was really, really visceral. It was a first-person action game with incredible graphics. And when you saw these incredible graphics, people said, hey, this is really realistic. And I think for some people, it was a little too realistic.
Doom was a controversial game because it was the first of its kind, first to shoot someone and have blood, first to see heads on a stick in a game. And but it was quickly followed up by a lot more of them, so it lost a lot of it.
The funny thing about Doom is that you were a guy going into hell and killing demons. id Software got numerous letters from religious groups being offended. No one grasped the concept that you were actually killing demons. That was the point. You were on God's side. It wasn't as controversial as people think.
If the regular version of Doom isn't offensive enough, you can always blow up Santa Claus, Barney, or Jesus thanks to mods. Just kidding about Jesus. If that doesn't turn you on, then you may want to go spend some personal time so you aren't so uptight. After the break, we have more cleavage than you can sink your teeth into, and we're going on a panty raid. Oh, so now you're interested. We'll be back. Welcome back to Filter. I'm Diane Mizota, and we're counting down the most controversial games of all time. The rankings for Filter shows come directly from the responses you post on the G4 website. To make your vote count, log on to g4tv.com/filter and select the Filter Rater. Then choose a category, vote on a scale of 1 to 10, and we'll take care of the rest. While you're there, be sure to post your suggestions for topics and games you'd like to see covered in future episodes. But screw the Filter Rater for now, and let's get back to the countdown. What's better than a bunch of babes wearing next to nothing and having their flying around while they straddle trees? Well, I guess actually dating one, but you take what you can get. Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball jiggles its way into number 7.
Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball was controversial, but it certainly was, pretty trippy. And then it was, all these sort of beach volleyball girls who were, really sort of, attractive in these skimpy little bikinis and playing beach volleyball.
I mean, the only reason people buy it is to see the bikinis and the jumping and the stretching and the different bikinis you can get.
It's a swimsuit edition of, volleyball games. It's actually a fun volleyball game, and they have a sort of social aspect to things. Whatever, it's beach volleyball. What do you expect?
Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball is controversial because the women are so hot, and there is implied lesbianism there. The girls have relationships. They apply sunblock on one another. They hang out. It's good.
Not all offensive games are about babes in bikinis, blood, and gore. Conker's Bad Fur Day for the N64 is a 3D platformer starring a foul-mouthed squirrel named Conker. So in true Conker fashion, this little crawls its piece of attitude into the damn 6 spot. Enjoy.
Conker's Bad Fur Day was just funny. At the beginning of the game, he wakes up and he's drunk, and he has a bad hangover, and he's just saying bad words all over the place. And this was on the N64, which was at the time didn't really have very many bad games.
First of all, it's a cartoon, so, parents are going to think, oh, it's a sweet game. Get a couple minutes into it, you're a drunk squirrel running around.
Conker's Bad Fur Day is controversial for many reasons. The one that I think is the best is having a boss monster called the Great Mighty Boo, who is going to throw his doo-doo at you while you are throwing toilet paper in his mouth in order to defeat him. Comedy platinum right there.
It was strange because you had this sort of cartoony Nintendo game, yet it was this really mature content. It was actually a really fun game when it came out, but yeah, it was controversial, I guess, because it had, some suggestive language and some suggestive scenarios, and it was pretty violent.
Beauty isn't the only thing that's in the eye of the beholder. What may go over the line for me may be just fine for you. We asked around to see what people consider to be the most controversial thing they've ever seen in a game, and we couldn't find anybody good, so we went with these guys.
Probably the most controversial thing I've seen in a game is probably Vice City. Just everything society deems wrong, you can just do at the drop of a hat.
I think a lot of controversial games that are out nowadays is, some of the war games, you got terrorists and the whole politically correct, or they call the opposing forces instead of terrorists now because of what's happened.
That's tough because I don't consider wanton violence very controversial. In the game Metal Gear Solid, it opens a lot of issues about nuclear arms and nuclear buildup, a lot of current issues.
There's a game called Narc coming out soon. Part of the game is taking drugs, and you take weed to turn everything into bullet time because it slows it all down. Speed gets your energy up, and there's other stuff as well. But I mean, that kind of game will attract so much controversy.
One of the most controversial things I've ever seen in a game was actually from a Sierra game called Phantasmagoria. This was a live-action video game, and I mean, it included sort of full-on sex scenes and nudity and stuff like that. It really just sort of pushed limits, and that game to me was defined as basically trying to shock you. It definitely made me say, wow, I mean, the game industry, they really want to shock you with this game, and they definitely accomplished that.
So now that we're tired of listening to you guys, let's get back to the vulgarity. Sitting snug at number 5 is a game that's more controversial than Michael Jackson. It's the Postal series, and it's caught in the middle spot.
Postal is that great game that features none other than Gary Coleman shooting random people. It's made by Running with Scissors, and it uses the Unreal technology, and we're proud of it.
Postal was a game that just basically was just controversial. They were just trying to make people mad. You can take off people's heads and piss on their bodies and all that other stuff, but you're just killing people.
Heard that was inspired by the postal workers because a bunch of them had gone on shooting rampages at work. That makes it more topical and more sort of touching, especially to people who've been hit by that kind of event in real life. That could really push some buttons.
The game is just insane. You can just walk up and piss on a person, light them on fire. You can do basically anything you want.
I don't think the games were ever very good, so I don't think people, really like them. But yeah, they certainly were controversial.
So, if lighting somebody on fire and having your way with them isn't your thing, then how about secretly photographing a group of models in their underwear? Pervert! Panty Raider from Here to Immaturity peeps in at number 4. Pervert!
Panty Raider, if I remember correctly, is a game where you basically save the world from aliens by throwing objects at girls to get them to take their clothes off.
Well, Panty Raider is pretty much controversial because it's pornographic, it's explicit, it's pretty controversial to me.
I don't see why it's so controversial. Everybody got their own opinion, If you don't want to play it, you ain't got to play it.
At a certain point, you would take a picture, and your picture would be judged based on, the sexiness of the picture. That's pretty controversial for when it came out. I don't know if it would be as controversial now. At that time, I don't think Americans thought the games were for anybody but kids. So the idea of a mature subject in a game might have gone against the grain of typical society at that time.
If you're not offended yet, don't worry. The sickest is yet to come, so stick around. Fine! Don't come back, but you're gonna miss out. I'm serious. We're gonna rag on your mom and Welcome back to Filter. I'm Diane Mizoda, counting down the most controversial games ever. So far, we've managed to assemble a list that would make any juvenile delinquent proud to be a gamer. Here's a recap of who is totally offensive, in case you weren't listening, you little bastards. BMX XXX offends its way to number 10 after a quick stop at a local strip club. Carmageddon plows its way into 9. Number 8 insults everyone with Doom. Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball bumps, sets, and grinds its way to number 7. Number 6 is that son of a conquers Bad Fur Day. Lock and Load with the Neighborhood Mailman, the Postal series, is number 5. And at number 4 is a trio of aliens looking for some sweet lovin' in Panty Raider From Here to Immaturity. While all the games on our list so far have managed to upset their fair share of protective parents and politicians, they're just second rate compared to what's up next. When Rockstar first announced Manhunt, it was shrouded in secrecy. All that was shown were some grainy-ass videos and full screenshots, kind of like the Paris Hilton video. When the game was finally released, gamers were treated with one of the darkest and grittiest games ever made. Manhunt kills at number 3.
Manhunt, that's pretty much everything. Violence, profanity, creative, killing. Yeah, I would say violence is the biggest thing on that, the gore factor.
Manhunt was, the violence I think was what shocked everyone. There was that whole kind of running man, people watching over you while you're forced to fight thing. So that was just the different nasty ways of killing people.
I didn't think Manhunt was that controversial, that they were really basing the controversy aspect to sell games when they didn't really need to. The gameplay was really solid, really good.
Bottom line is the violence, and basically come up with the most creative and graphic ways to use certain objects to eviscerate people.
Manhunt is a game in which you can kill someone with a plastic bag by like putting it over their head and they're suffocating them, and apparently that's pretty controversial. I hear in the sequel you're going to be able to use a spork.
Before we get to the 2 most offensive games on the planet, let's take a look at some of the titles that tried to be naughty but just weren't bad enough. Here's who got filtered out.
I'm really disappointed that Custer's Revenge didn't make the list. That was that old Atari 2600 game in which you could have your way with a Native American woman. Very horrible for the time.
Leisure Suit Larry was controversial back in the day. It was the first game with like a sexual theme because you were just like some loser from the Marina Del Rey with like a leisure suit going around trying to get hold of women in some late car. It was just like, ooh, wow, adult theme.
Final Fantasy VII. Honestly, you look at the game and it's simple RPG, but if you just look into the background story, there was so many controversial things today. Like there was cloning in the game, there was death in the game. I mean, you kind of got to look into it a little bit more open-minded, but it's out there.
We've gone from Postal to Peeping Toms, and just when you thought we couldn't sink any lower, we do. Mortal Kombat introduced the Fatality, a finishing move that ranged from ripping out your opponent's spine to tearing off his head. Sounds like a good time, but that was the past. Today, the Grand Theft Auto series has managed to offend politicians, minorities, and even evil stepmoms. So who comes out on top? Is it the bloody beat-em-up action series, or are you into modern-day urban violence? It's time for me to shut the f*** up and show you this.
Grand Theft Auto is controversial for many, many reasons. The one that everyone is obsessed with is picking up a prostitute, having sex with her in your car, having her get out and then running her over and taking the money back. I mean, if you ask me, it just sounds like you're a thrifty guy in that game.
You know, Grand Theft Auto has become synonymous with controversy. I guess because of the level of violence. I guess because of the fact, you know, there are these hookers you can hire, you know, in the game and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it was a really, really great game. Not because it was so controversial. I think that's something that people really have to remember.
GTA has just got so much attention in the press. Mortal Kombat, I mean, it was controversial. It kind of kicked things off in terms of government scrutiny a few years back. But GTA, you know, it's a great game.
Most controversial game in the filter face-off is going to definitely be Grand Theft Auto.
Mortal Kombat was controversial because it was the game that introduced fatalities to the fighting genre. You could pull out someone's spine.
It was all done in fun, but for some people it was seen as much too violent and much too controversial. I think for its day, actually, Mortal Kombat was probably a more controversial game than Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto got a lot of attention, mostly because it was such a great game and everyone was talking about it. And Mortal Kombat was a great game too, but I mean, that inspired congressional hearings. You with Joseph Lieberman was giving speeches about how violent it was and stuff like that. And that was by far the more controversial game. I think it was just in the time when a lot of people didn't know a lot about video games. So the mainstream media, they really picked up on that, and they really just sort of started talking about it. And, it was a controversial game, and in some ways much more controversial than Grand Theft Auto back in the day.
The polls are closed, the votes are counted, and the most controversial game of all time is the Grand Theft Auto series. That's right. Grand Theft Auto humiliates the competition and is officially the most controversial game ever made. That wraps up this episode of Filter. Remember, the opinions expressed on this show are yours, not mine. So make your vote count on future episodes by logging on to the Filter show page at g4tv.com/filter. Until then, I'm Diane Mizota, and I'll see you next time.